The state capture report asserts that the ANC was responsible for weakening many state institutions by deploying unqualified and inexperienced people, creating fertile ground for corruption and state capture. Explained as the appointment of loyalists by the governing party to ensure that the government institutions stay true to the mandate of the party, the Cadre Deployment Policy has become a subject of academic research, of scrutiny, criticism, and it's actually even become a court case. In June, the DA launched a court action against the ANC at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria to declare the policy unconstitutional and illegal. A study from the University of the Free State Journal asks whether the ANC and the Cadre Deployment Policy in the Post-apartheid South Africa is a product of democratic centralization or a recipe for a constitutional crisis. William Gumede is Associate Professor at the Wits School of Governance and is also the Executive Chairperson of Democracy Works. He joins us now for this discussion. Great to have you, Prof. Gumede. Thanks for your time.
Always good to be with you. I'm grateful, and good morning to your viewers.
Thank you. So let's talk about Gwede Mantashe arguing during the commission that all political parties use the policy, not only the ANC and not only in South Africa, but this is practice across the world. So why is it seen as a problem?
He's not entirely truthful. If you look around the world, of course, it is practiced around the world, but those countries that do practice it, those are the countries who have been failing. And those are the failed states, and those are the countries who haven't been growing. And then you've got the other group of countries where it hasn't been done, where merit is the overriding factor in appointment in the public service. Those countries have grown, those countries have moved from poverty into wealth status. And practical examples are the East Asian states, those miracles tigers that we talk about, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan. Those are the countries that use merit-based in the public service. I mean, they've grown from extreme poverty in the 1950s, early 1960s. The countries like South Korea and Taiwan were poorer than almost all African countries. And by the 1980s, with merit-based policies, all of them were in the top 30 richest countries in the world, while most of the African countries like Ghana and so on actually became poorer than they were at independence.
Yeah. I mean, do you agree with the testimony of ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa at the Commission that cadre deployment is aimed at ensuring that a person most fit for purpose is appointed at any critical position in government?
Well, in practice, we have not seen that, of course. I mean, yeah, we're sitting, there's going to be load shedding pretty soon. And load shedding is actually a direct result of cadre deployment. CEOs that were appointed a decade or so ago through cadre deployment, tenders that were given to cadre-connected companies, all destroyed the entity to the point where we now have the power outages. We've seen jobs lost, we've seen companies close, we've seen people die also from the consequences of power outages. It's deadly. Of course, we also know of South African Airways. I mean, now the company is bankrupt, people are unemployed on the streets, families have broken down. Because CEOs and chairs and board members were appointed that did not have the skills, but they had the political skill. They had the struggle skill. They were connected to the ANC leadership, to former President Jacob Zuma, and so on. And now our national airline is bankrupt.
I mean, you even see guys speaking out like, former ministers, Trevor Manuel, saying, you need to abandon this issue of cadre deployment. It is what is ruining state institutions, pulling the economy down. And you've got names like Trevor Manuel speaking out against this, and yet it still continues unabated. Why? Is it just the issue of self-gain? What is at the heart of all of it? I mean, let's talk about that. Why is cadre deployment even a thing?
There is a misperception. I mean, last year I gave a talk, and I must tell you, there was such angry criticism when I said that it is not a good policy for the country, because I think there's a misconception, I suspect even among not only the ANC but also other political parties, that cadre deployment is a good thing, and if a party wins the elections, then a party can deploy cadres at the top in top positions in government. Now that is wrong. In a democracy, in no democracy do parties generally can obviously appoint political people in cabinet. That's why we have cabinet, and also political advisors, assistants, and so on. That is normally political appointees, but it stops there. Now, what we have political appointees at every level: Director General, CEOs of state-owned companies, even now at the entry level in the public service. Now, that is what has been undermining public service delivery. So I think that, society and ordinary citizens must understand that it is unconstitutional for a political party to appoint its cadres based only on the fact that they are loyal members, not on their competence to government at all levels. Yes, political people can be appointed, but really in very selected positions, not in a senior public service. They can be appointed to cabinet ministers as political advisors, PAs, and so on, and secretaries and so on.
I mean, you read on further from what Manuel was saying, and I quote this because we are talking about a man who has 20 years of experience within inside of government, serving as a minister, and saying, never once, when you talk about this, the deployment committee, as he said, never once can I recall having ever to have to submit recommendations to a deployment committee. That was something that it never happened. It was mostly NEC members, and that was kind of what it all consisted of. And he was speaking out and saying, and let me ask you your views on this, Zondo's recommendations, because that's pretty much so at the heart of all of it. And people are coming out and agreeing, saying that Zondo recommends an independent agency to be set up against corruption in public procurement, and that should be established. And also when it comes to the so-called deployment, or not cadre deployment, but deploying the right people for the job. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think, the recommendations is a powerful recommendation by the Zondo Commission, and, I welcome it, and I think society must welcome it. The thing is, again, I mean, going back to what Trevor Manuel was saying, the public service has certain rules where, and cadre deployment undermine those rules. And then our constitution also has certain rules. And it also, cadre deployment also undermines the constitutional values. But for me, certainly, the procurement system in South Africa is also where a lot of our state capture have taken place. And by giving cadre-connected businesses contracts ahead of other competent businesses of blacks and whites, it really undermined public services across the country. So the crisis of public service delivery really has been, I think, intricately linked to cadre deployment of individuals in positions, but also the companies of cadres, companies that didn't have the capacity and they deliver services below par services, and the whole public service delivery system crashed. And the same one could also be said, about infrastructure. South Africa's infrastructure is now on the verge of collapse. We're facing system collapse. Businesses and farmers can't get their products up to the ports. Our rail system has collapsed. And a critical part of that has been cadre deployment without the competency to run infrastructure or to maintain infrastructure. So, yes, of course, we have had the COVID financial crisis has caused a big crisis in our country, and now, of course, also the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war has also had a major impact. But the really bigger impact has been cadre deployment, has made our country really uncompetitive and unable to compete with our emerging market peers, and has allowed our country to go backwards, whereas every other country that our peers have moved forward, and also has made it very difficult for our country to build up the reserves to deal with COVID-19 financial crisis, and now with the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, whereas other countries have built up the reserves because they had more competent people, both in the public sector and in the procurement space, and they build up the reserves, and we have been unable to do that.
I want to ask you, President Cyril Ramaphosa's role in all of this. You actually chaired these cadre deployments to these institutions that we're speaking about, these very institutions where malfeasance took place, especially during the past decade of state capture. So I want to talk to that. And I also want to talk about the Zondo finding, where he found that President Ramaphosa had not been honest when he told the Commission that the deployment committee did not make recommendations on judicial appointments. So we're talking here about business, but the judiciary is also another issue where we're talking cadre deployment. So help us speak to this and the President's hand in all of it.
Absolutely. I mean, the President was really in the dock as on the Commission around a deployment committee. If you remember, he did say, well, actually, that you couldn't find the minutes, or the minutes disappeared, which obviously is ridiculous. When you have a formal meeting of a political party or any organized entity, you have meetings, meeting minutes. So clearly that was one way of him trying to escape a responsibility. I think he should have come out at the Zondo Commission and accepted and accepted responsibility, because he did chair at some point, and of course Jacob Zuma also at another point before chaired the National Deployment Committee of the ANC. So President Ramaphosa should have accepted responsibility. And also, of course, sadly, former President Jacob Zuma didn't appear at the Zondo Commission, so we couldn't hear his side of the story. But we need senior leaders of the ANC to come out now after the Zondo Commission and accept responsibility and reject the policy, because the policy is not good for the country, it's not good for the ANC also.
Yeah. I want to ask your views as well on the DA launching a court case to end ANC cadre deployment, basically saying it's inconsistent with the Constitution and therefore it's invalid. But a study at the same time from the University of the Free State asks whether it is a product of democratic centralization or a recipe for a constitutional crisis. Why are these arguments bringing this all back to the Constitution?
Yes, because the Constitution the Constitution is very clear in terms of appointing competent people to positions in public service, to democratic institutions, to oversight institutions. And yes, the Constitution also talks about empowerment and redress. But the Constitution says whatever, empowerment and redress must be done also in a fair way. Now, the whole thing about cadre deployment is it's not fair. If you only appoint your own supporters, and then additionally you appoint them if they don't have the skills, that's really unfair, and that is unconstitutional. But, our service delivery crisis that is caused by cadre deployment is also causing a constitutional crisis, because if, the appointment of cadres to democratic institutions, oversight institutions, we've seen it, the public protector and so on, is causing a constitutional crisis, because people begin to lose faith in our democratic institutions, because they are steered by people who have no interest in protecting ordinary citizens or the right of ordinary citizens. Cadres appear to protect the rights of the ANC and the rights of the ANC leadership and their own, and also for their own self-interest. Now, that is causing a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, indeed. Final question to you as we prepare for the news now at 7. This cadre deployment policy, it really has been criticised, and you gather from what you've been saying in your analysis. I mean, there's what comes with it is corruption, poor skills in government, especially in the municipalities, where people with no skills find their way into the highest echelons of government, making the biggest decisions for all of us, handling massive budgets. They don't know what they're doing. And of course, today, a huge downward spiral of what has happened to government is blamed on cadre deployment. The question is, why do they continue, the ANC continue with it, despite the deterioration, not only of SOEs and municipalities, but inevitably the entire country? Why? Why continue with it?
You know, unfortunately, it appears that the ANC leadership are living in a bubble, taxpayer-funded bubble, away from the struggles of ordinary people. I mean, South Africans are struggling. We're in the biggest financial and social crisis and political crisis, certainly, I think, possibly since the Second World War in our country. But those who drive taxpayer money paid cars, who lives in taxpayer funded mansions, live far removed, they social distance. So those cadre deployees, ironically, who live in a bubble far away from the struggles of ordinary people, they become so self-interested. And I think the only time when they will really listen to the voices of ordinary people is when ordinary people don't vote for them.
We leave it there, Prof. Thank you very, very much for this, and a vital conversation when it comes to the issue of state capture, the findings, the Zondo Commission, and the recommendations being put in place. But cadre deployment, one of the biggest problems identified. Professor William Gumede, chairperson of Democracy Works.